Yes, the zombies are back now and they're ready to test. They'll take that development code and tear it from your chest. Refactor your mind, take the test from red to green. All with an undead beam.
You're watching Rails testing for zombies, and this is level 2, where we're going to be talking about model testing. So we're going to take what you know about unit testing and figure out how to test our active record models inside of our Rails app. When we run Rails generate scaffold inside of our Rails app, it generates a bunch of files for us, some of which may be tests. You can see here it generated a test unit zombie test.rb. It also generated for us a fixture, which we'll see later on in this level. If we open up the zombie test.rb, inside there at the top, we'll see that it requires test helper. This is a configuration file. Inside here, we can require other testing libraries. We can write custom methods that all of our tests get access to. And of course, we can write configuration in here. You can see it defined a zombie test class. And did it write any tests for us? No, sorry, Rails doesn't write your tests for you. That would be amazing, but it doesn't. We need to write our own model tests. But before we get into that, we're writing model tests. Model tests run against active record. Active record interfaces with our database. So we need to take a step back and talk a little bit about configuring a database to do testing with. If we look inside of our database.yaml file, we'll see that there are 3 different environments by default, one of which is the test environment. This is only for testing. So we need to make sure this test database is populated with the right database structure so we can test against it. How do we do that? Well, there's a couple different rake tasks we need to be familiar with, starting with rake db test prepare. That's going to check to see if there's any migrations we need to run. If there aren't any we need to run, then it's going to simply load the schema.rb file into our test database. A few other commands you should know about. The rake test command, or just rake by default, is going to run db test prepare, and then it's going to try to run all of your tests. To run an individual test file, we would simply write this on the command line. You'll notice that we're using the -I again to specify our load path. This is because at the top of that test file, remember, it requires test helper, and that test helper is in the test directory. So we need to specify -I test, just like so. To run a single test case, we simply run that same command and then -n and then the name of the test. So let's go ahead and create our first model test already. I'm pretty sure we're going to want to put a validation on the name field inside of our zombie class. So let's write the test first before we write the implementation. So here we have a function called test invalid without a name. Inside there, we create a new zombie. And then we're going to assert that the zombie is not valid and specify a custom failure message, name is not being validated. Now before we run the test, the one thing you might have noticed about zombie test is that it inherits from active support test case. This is a class from Rails that gives you access to a bunch of helper methods. One of the helper methods allows you to write your tests, your test definitions, in a nicer form. We can rewrite the test definition to say test invalid without a name do, and include the test in a block. A little more readable. Now let's run our test by using the rake command, and looks like we forgot to run a migration. So let's go back and run that migration. So rake db migrate, our database is migrated. Now we can go ahead and run rake again, and it fails. Yay, it fails. It was supposed to fail, don't worry. Remember, the first step is to write a test and make it fail. So let's jump back now and write our validation. Here we are in our zombie.rb file, and all we have to write is validates name presence true. If we run our tests again, they pass. Now that we've written a test to ensure that our validation fails if we don't have a name, let's write a test to make sure that if we have all the properties on zombie that it does pass, that it is valid. So we're going to test valid with all attributes. We have a zombie, we set the name, we set the graveyard. We're going to assert that it's valid. And if it errors out, we're going to say zombie was not valid. And you may see a pattern emerging. Very often in our model test, the first line is going to start out by creating a new zombie and setting fields over and over and over again. So how do we stop this duplication? Well, this is where fixtures come in. Remember at the beginning of the level, when we ran the Rails generate scaffold, it created for us this fixture file here, zombies.yml. Inside there by default, it looks something like this. We obviously want to customize this a little bit more, so we're going to do that and specify a zombie named Ash and a zombie named Tim. Now instead of creating a new zombie every time, we can just do z equals zombies Ash. What this command is doing is it's actually pulling zombie Ash out of the database into an active record object and setting that equal to the z variable. So how do fixtures work exactly? Well, when you run your test, the first thing that happens is that your Rails application grabs all the fixtures, puts them all into the test database. Does that at the very beginning when you run your tests. Then when you run a test, if anything gets changed there in the database, at the end of that individual test, any changes get rolled back. It's transactional for each test. Now we can take that command, move it back into our test. Let's go ahead and create another test too called invalid name gives error message. So here we're going to set name equals to nil. So we're sort of resetting our fixture, checking to see if it's valid. And we're going to assert that the can't be blank validation message gets put into the errors hash properly. And if not, it's going to give the failure message, presence error not found on zombie. Enough with validations. Let's create a new method on our zombie class using test first development. So we're going to say can generate avatar URL. We're going to use our fixture to get zombie Ash. Then we're going to assert that this string gets returned when we call z.avatar URL. All right, we have a test. We would run the test. Hopefully it would fail. Then we're going to go back into our model and let's define that method. So inside the zombie class, we're going to have avatar URL returns this string. If we run it again, all of our tests should pass. What about testing model relationships? Because remember, we're building Twitter for zombies, so our zombie has many tweets. So one way we could test that is saying test should respond to tweets. We're going to have an assert respond to. So we're going to make sure that our zombie Ash has a method called tweets. We can also test this by saying that our zombie should contain tweets. So we get the zombie and then we assert that z.tweets equals 2 tweets. Uh-oh. We need tweets now. We need tweets out of the database. So this might be a good chance to go back and add some tweets fixtures which we can use for this test. Here inside the tweets fixture, we're going to declare 2 tweets. We have Ash's first tweet and Ash's second tweet. You'll notice that each of them has a zombie ID 1. But if you remember back to our zombie fixture, we never declared any IDs. So we're going to have to reopen that zombie fixture and specify that Ash has an ID of 1 and maybe Tim has an ID of 2, and that will get properly set in our database. Now if we call zombiesash.tweets, it'll return all of Ash's tweets. And that's basically the same thing as creating an array where we return both of these fixtures. So if we go back to our assertion, we might say assert that this array is equal to what gets returned when we call zombiesash.tweets. However, this is kind of a brittle test. It's not so good. Down the line, we might have more tweets for Ash. Things might get changed. So how might we write this test in a better way? Instead, we could test that zombie tweets should only contain tweets that belong to zombie. We can do this by going through all of Ash's tweets and ensuring that they belong to him by using that .all command. So that's going to go through each of them and make sure that that conditional is always true. I know that was a lot of content. No shame if you want to go back and watch the video again, but get ready. Coming at you, Rails model challenges. Get to it.